Hi, and welcome to the show where we share the stories of the many who intersect with our healthcare system but are rarely heard from. My name is Kevin Poe, founder and editor of Kevin MD. Today on the show, we have Amy Vertrees. She is a general surgeon and physician coach, and she wrote the Kevin MD article, Physicians Need Growth Days. Amy, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. It's a real honor to be here. I really appreciate your time.
So we'll get into your article in a little bit, but first off, can you just briefly share your story and journey to where you are today?
I trained at the only military medical school we have, Uniformed Services University. Then I did my general surgery residency at Walter Reed Army Medical Center when it was in DC. I was there for the heights of the war in Afghanistan and Iraq. Afterwards, I stayed on as staff. I went to Afghanistan twice myself, Iraq once. And after 17 years in the military, I left and came down to Columbia, Tennessee, where I'm currently working. I was an employed surgeon for about 3 years until I started realizing that I was still missing something. I joined the Leverage and Growth Summit last year with Peter Kim and learned that there was a lot more than just surgery out there. And so I started exploring the world of coaching as well, and also real estate. And that kind of led me to think that this employed job, that maybe there was a little bit more out there. So I left my employed position after my contract was up. I bought a building and renovated it, and I became a private practice surgeon and kind of found what I was looking for. Coaching helped me a lot with that. There's a ton of mind drama when it comes to changing jobs and such. And so I actually ended up becoming a coach myself. Mm-hmm. So about 7 months ago, I met with Kelly Casperson. He's a podcast, You Are Not Broken, and Jess McMichael, who does the Clean Blue Towel. We linked up together and we joined the Common Thread Women Surgeons group. We started off with a Facebook group. We're currently at about 750 women surgeons, and we have a private group coaching called Room One. And we're working to really empower women surgeons and change the culture associated with surgery.
So tell me some of the issues that you're seeing in your coaching practice that face women surgeons today.
It's funny because the more that we coached, that's how we came up with the idea of the common thread. Is we all have actually very similar problems. There's time scarcity. There is, what do people think of me? There's, of course, dealing with complications. Surgery is a very difficult. You go in there, no one really knows the right answer sometimes, and you just do the best you can with the experience that you have. And so it's really just, sharing our experiences and realizing that we have all the same similar problems, and there's a way out of it.
You also made that transition from being an employed surgeon into private practice, and that's not always an easy transition. So can you share some of the challenges that you face in making that transition into private practice general surgery?
Yes, I was fortunate that my hospital was very supportive because really they recognize that I'll still bring money to the hospital. And I think the main thing that I learned and want people to understand is that we bring so much to the table. I think that administrators do want to work with us. They have to keep the hospitals afloat. We have to keep that in mind, but we have to understand what we bring. We bring them money, we bring them patients, and knowing our worth is helpful. And so knowing my own worth helped me open my own private practice because I know what I'm bringing, and I'm a little bit more confident in really thinking that I can manage anything that comes up. And private practice is very different, dealing with insurance companies and things like that too. And over the last several months, we've worked through some of those challenges of, how do we make sure that we're checking insurance and getting things paid and following all the boxes that are different for all the insurances. And so huge learning curve in a different way, but we're navigating that okay.
Now, you mentioned that a lot of this started with Peter Kim's Leverage and Growth Summit, which certainly I highly recommend. Now that you're into private practice, can you describe how has that transition helped you find what you were looking for in your career?
Absolutely fantastic because, I went from the military where we had very little control to employment where I had more control. And then I started realizing I can actually have even more than that. Mm-hmm. And so I could choose the clinic schedule that I want, the practice that I want, the people that I work with, which was very, very helpful. And as a result, I finished my notes at the end of the clinic. I have folks that work for me that are motivated to work for me, and really just made me feel much more confident. I feel much more like a surgeon who people are working mm-hmm. for and not against.
Excellent. So let's transition now into the Kevin MD article that you wrote. It's titled Physicians Need Growth Days. Now, for those who didn't get a chance to read that article, can you just walk my audience through it and share the story of why you decided to write it?
Absolutely. I think when I coach folks, the most important thing that people realize is that we're not really listening to what's going on in our heads. And as a coach, the very first thing we're doing is having people start to listen to what's going on in their mind. And the very first thing people say is, I don't have time for this, and we're all overworked and overburdened. And being able to give ourselves some time to focus on just ourselves. And I wanted to emphasize, this is not mental health days. This is not, whatever. This is just days strategically taken so we can pause and really start questioning the things that we really need to question to move ourselves forward. Like, pausing to say, like, how are things going? Am I serving my purpose? What is my purpose? And am I acting in ways that are serving where I want to go? And if we don't take the time to really actively reflect that, then what happens is that we're just reactors. We're reacting to whatever comes up. And, if we're reacting, we're people pleasing at its finest. We're never progressing forward. We're never seeing if we're on the right path. We may be lucky and land on the right path, but we're not really sure that that's what it is. If you pause, you become less reactor and more creator. And so now you can start to visualize, visualize what your future is and start actively creating it for yourself. And you can't do that without really pausing to think about that. It's interesting because when I encourage people to start taking some time off, the very first thing I ask them is like, what does this bring up for you when you think about taking a day off? And it's so entertaining. It's I can't, I'll lose money, I'll lose skills, I'll lose patience, no one will think of me, it's that scarcity concept. And it's interesting because Brene Brown brings up scarcity, saying that this is shame and disengagement and comparisоnism. And so, we won't even let ourselves take some time off, which is, I think, a problem in itself.
So tell me a little bit about that conversation when you meet that physician who is a little bit hesitant to take that time off for exactly the reasons you say. Take me through the next steps of that conversation.
Well, then I asked them, how are things going? Oh, I'm overwhelmed. I couldn't possibly stop. I was like, what if you take time off to strategically think, like, how can I make people work for me? How can I figure out, how to delegate more tasks? I said, you need to at least stop the treadmill. And that is what these days are. Just stop the onslaught of things. So then you could pause and say, how can I actually question my current process and make it better? And I would argue that they can actually gain more time by creating some of these times rather than just continuing to be a reactor.
Now, what are some of the things that you suggest these physicians do during these times off?
Yes, it's so interesting because I did have to give a little bit more direction, because when I say take some time off, the very first thing is, am I going to do it wrong?
Yeah.
We're so used to doing everything, in a certain way. And I really, gave a little bit more direction over time, rather than just saying take time off. Just say, this is a time to actively question yourself. And sometimes I'll give specific questions of, really, how's it going? What is my purpose? How can I make my life a little bit better? And am I on the right path? And asking specific questions. And otherwise I said, don't do anything. Go to Starbucks, go for a walk, go for a run. This is a day that you can determine what you want to be. You can determine what you would consider a success.
You're completely right. A lot of physicians, they are so used to having that direction is that if you give them a lot of unstructured time, they're not going to know what to do with themselves, right? So
Yes.
Can you share a story of a hypothetical or particular client you had in mind where they followed your advice, and describe how that has changed their professional and personal life?
It's interesting because I think the most common thing that I see, the very first thing, and again, I changed my advice over time, is when they took time off, like, all they think about is just overwhelm, all the things they could do.
Mm-hmm.
And so once I started giving a little bit more directions of asking specific questions, and then the most rewarding thing was they came back and said, I actually started delegating a little bit more. And I started realizing there's so many of these tasks that I could pass off to someone else. And that's another thing, that a lesson that people learned, is that sometimes it's hard to delegate other tasks because we feel like we're bothering people.
Mm-hmm.
And then, what happens is that you devalue your team. And so it's really kind of reframing, stepping back and say, let's look at my team and how can they help me? And so I've had a lot of folks come back that say, now I can actually help them or have them help me get my notes done a little bit faster.
Mhm.
I feel a little bit more calm during the day. And then now I'm actually looking forward to taking more time off because I can see the value of it.
Now, how often do you suggest physicians take time off? Is there like a set amount of time, or is it whenever they feel a certain degree of overwhelm? Is there a set schedule? How often does this happen?
No, there's absolutely no rules at all. For me personally, I just took 2 days off a month. So when the monthly calendar, like with the call schedule came out, it's like I just picked this day and that day. And it didn't matter if it was a clinic or an OR schedule. I just picked a day and I said, I'm committing to it.
Mhm.
And so I committed to that day. And so I encourage people, it really just depends on their schedule. But I think a minimum of like 2 days a month is probably a good starting place. When you realize that it can actually make you more efficient, that you can even potentially build more time off.
A lot of doctors I talk to, they're a little bit hesitant, especially in the employed setting. What would my administrators think about me? I'm just taking these administrative growth days and I'm not building up my RVUs. I'm not being as productive. And there are a lot of doctors who are a little bit hesitant to speak up and take these growth days. So what kind of advice can you give to these doctors to just go ahead and take it and have them be more assertive in taking these days?
I think really this is where you can start working on your dialogue with your administrators. A physician burnout is real and no one exactly knows how. I mean, there's lots of great advice, but you don't want to get to the point where you're burned out and then starting taking this advice. And I think that it's really making a case to your administrators to say, I need to build in some of this time to be more efficient and work on the team. This will stop burnout. This will save me in the long run. And it's more likely to keep me employed here and successful. And I think that if you make a good case for your administrator and even just try a trial, say, I'm going to try this, and then maybe we could meet later and see. And so you can start building that evidence for yourself. Because this is not something that currently has any kind of randomized control trial, whatever. But I think that this is also an exercise to build a relationship with your administrators. And I think that it is a dialogue. And it is a relationship that you want to cultivate. And the more that you show respect to them and say, like, I understand where your concerns are, but I think that I'll actually be more efficient. And really what you want to do is see it from their perspective, and then you sell it as they have a problem. You are offering this a solution to their problem, and then check back with them and then show the progress and really support that relationship.
We're talking to Amy Vertrees. She's a general surgeon and a physician coach, and she wrote the Kevin MD article, Physicians Need Growth Days. Amy, in your coaching practice, what are some of the other issues that you see affecting physicians today, and what are some of your solutions to tackle them?
I think the most common thing that I see is that people don't realize that everyone is thinking the same thing. Everyone is wanting to do the right thing. Everyone wants to have a positive outcome with the patients, and in surgery, that everyone wants to feel confident. And there's always a little bit of self-doubt there, and I think normalizing that is most helpful. And with the common thread, when we start showing everyone that we're all having the same problems,
Mm-hmm.
it's reassuring. For one thing, we realize there's nothing wrong with us,
Mm-hmm.
and that really shines light on the shame and the disengagement that we have, and really starts letting us reach out to each other in engagement. And then, starting to see that other people have some solutions. And by sharing this, we can actually really, raise each other up.
And my final question, what's your take-home message that you want to leave with the Kevin MD audience?
I think that I want to challenge this concept of scarcity, that we can actually start taking some time off to cultivate our own identity, embracing this sense of worthiness and boundaries and engagement with those around us. And that's actually how we fix burnout, is by knowing our own self-worth and raising awareness with everyone else.
Amy, thank you so much for sharing your time and insight. And thanks again for being on the show.
Thanks, Kevin. I appreciate it.